All right, we're going to continue chapter 1, and we're going to talk about scientific method. So we're going to use this one species of mouse as an example to take us through the method in which scientists use to investigate things. So this is a mouse. It's the same species, but you can see these two images show the same species, however they look different. So we have the beach mouse of the same species, and it's got a lighter coat color, so it kind of blends in better at the beach with the lighter sand. And then the inland mouse is a lot darker, so it kind of blends in with the inland environment where there's a lot more dirt and we have leaves and branches, so we have a little more brown things. So the overriding question is, what can this actual mouse teach us about biology? Now, this is a very broad question. And in order to investigate this, you must break this broad question up into smaller questions. Inquiring about life, we're going to inquire, basically you want to try to find out the answers to certain questions. So we have this mouse, it's the same species, they look different in different environments. This is this species' ability to adapt to its environment. An organism's adaptations to its environment are the result of evolution, or descent with modification. Evolution is basically the process of change that has transformed all living things that have ever existed on Earth. In order for scientists to investigate things, they must follow a process. And this process is called scientific method. This is actually a process. It's a stepwise methodical process which allows scientists to investigate one thing at a time so they can draw conclusions and then ask more questions to learn more about what they're. Okay, so during the process of scientific method, observations are made. This is really the first step. And then questions are asked. And then you want to try to answer that question. This is your hypothesis, what you think the answer is to the question. Now, before we move on, let's kind of go over some basic terminology and descriptions. So the word science in general is derived from Latin, and it means to know. Now, inquiry is basically the process of searching for information or explanations of natural phenomena. Scientists use this systematic process called scientific method to inquire for information about what. Let's use a relatively simple example to go through the process of scientific method. So let's say you are trying to do homework and you observe that your lamp on your desk is not working. Well, of course, you're going to ask yourself, well, why isn't it working? So now you want to try to solve that problem, right? So your first step is observation. So this is what you observe. And then, of course, you're curious, so you want to ask this question, right? So it's basically about your observation. Here we have, why doesn't the desk lamp work? Now we're going to kind of go through two processes. We're going to develop a hypothesis, at least one hypothesis, of why the desk lamp doesn't work. So you think that the bulb is improperly screwed in, so it's not maybe all the way screwed down. So then you make a prediction. So after your hypothesis, you want to make a prediction, and it's the prediction that's actually testing which designs the test. So here, your prediction is basically an if-then statement. So if I reinstall the bulb, this will fix the problem. So then the desk lamp will work. So then you test it. So the testing, this is the process, right? So this is the procedure that you're going to follow. And what you're going to do is just take out the bulb and then reinstall it to make sure it's properly screwed in. And then you turn it on to see if it works. Now your results are whether it works or not. Okay, so does your desk lamp work? Does it not work? So let's say your desk lamp doesn't work. So your conclusion is basically the hypothesis is not supported. So then you need to come up with an alternate hypothesis. So what's your alternate? Let's say you think that the bulb is burnt out. So then your prediction is, if I replace the bulb, this will fix the problem, so the desk lamp will work again. So then you go out and buy a bulb, and then you replace the bulb. Okay, so this is your procedure, and then you turn on the lamp to see if it works. So is the lamp working, or is the lamp not working? So let's say it is working, right? So then you're going to draw a conclusion. So this means that the hypothesis is supported. So the way you state this is that the reason why the desk lamp was not working was likely due to the bulb being burnt out. You cannot say for sure, even though you're pretty sure that that's the case, right? In science, you cannot prove anything. And if anything is proven, there is a mathematical expression for it. So you can only say that the evidence suggests that it was the bulb and it was burnt out. So as you are performing your experiments, you're going to record your observations, and the recorded observations are called data. Now there's two major types of data. There's qualitative data and there's quantitative data. And then quantitative data can be divided into two additional groups of data, those data that are discrete and those data that are continuous. So let's look at qualitative first. Qualitative data is data that's more descriptive. Basically, there's no numbers involved, right? So you don't have any numbers. You can say that something is present or absent, but you can't say how much of it's present, right? So an example would be, I drink coffee every day. So that is data. So every day you record that you drink coffee. Now let's look at quantitative data. Okay, so if we were going to use that same example right here, so qualitative would be I drink coffee every day. Well, quantitative would be I drink this much cups of coffee every day. Now, here, discrete would be it's basically counted. Okay, so here we have 4 cups of coffee a day. Okay, so that's a discrete amount. Now, continuous could be, it's going to be something that's actually measured. It needs to be measured in some way. So you could say that I drink 80 grams of coffee every day. Okay, so the difference between discrete and continuous is that discrete is counted and then continuous is measured. Both of them are quantitative because you have a number which represents an amount of coffee you drink every day. Now let's talk about reasoning. Reasoning is basically your ability or how you draw conclusions. Now there's 2 types of reasoning. There's inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Let's go ahead and start with inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is going to draw conclusions through a process of induction. So what this requires is repeated observations, which will lead to a general conclusion or a generalization. For example, the sun always rises in the east. The sun has risen in the east from the beginning of time as we know it. It has risen in the east for many, many years. You know that it's going to rise in the east tomorrow, and it'll probably rise in the east 50 to 100 or 1,000 years from now. This is repeatedly seen, so we can generalize and basically say it always rises in the east. Another example is you could say that all organisms are made of cells. So we know just from observations that every single living organism is made up of one or more what we call as a cell, the smallest living unit of life. Okay, so that's repeated observations. We've seen that over every organism that we've identified. Now, deductive reasoning uses general premises to make specific predictions or kind of assume things almost. So, for example, if you know that all apples are fruits, and you know that a Granny Smith is an apple, you can combine those together and you can say that because Granny Smith is an apple and all apples are fruits, you could say that a Granny Smith must also be a fruit because it's an apple and an apple is a fruit. Do you see what where I'm going with this? So you have several items of knowledge which can be combined to make a prediction about something. Now, I talked about a hypothesis before. A hypothesis is basically your answer to the question, right? So you have a question. What is your answer? Your hypothesis may not be the right answer, which is totally fine, right? But the hypothesis must lead to predictions that can be tested and making observations or performing experiments, right? An experiment is a scientific test which is controlled typically, or it's controlled in some way. It's carried out under controlled conditions. You don't want too many variables because then you can't see for sure that your results are reliable. All right, let's see an example. So let's kind of go back to our desk lamp. Remember, the observation was that the desk lamp doesn't work. And then your question is, of course, why doesn't it work? And then there were two hypotheses. We have the first hypothesis, then the alternate hypothesis. So the first hypothesis stated that the bulb wasn't screwed in properly. And the second hypothesis, the bulb is burnt out. Now look at these. Both of these hypotheses are testable. So they're actually testable. You can actually change the bulb or re-screw it in, reinstall it, and see if it works. Supernatural and religious explanations are not within the bounds of science because they are not testable, per se. And not everyone sees or believes these things. So you must have some sort of physical evidence. In terms of the scientific process is actually flexible. So scientific method is basically an idealized process of inquiry. It's not strict. However, very few scientific inquiries adhere rigidly to this approach. Like I said, it's not strict, it's flexible. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room. So backtracking and rethinking is almost always necessary. Partway through, let's look at this process. Here's the realistic model. So here you have, let's start in the middle. We have forming and testing hypothesis, assuming that you already have an observation and you've asked the question. So you're going to form and test hypothesis. Well, there's a number of factors that affect your ability to come to a conclusion. So you must consider, of course, you want to explore and discover things. So that's really what drives scientific method, ultimately. What is the benefit in terms of society, and what outcome will occur upon your discovery? Also, once you've drawn a conclusion, the community must analyze it. So basically, the scientific community must be able to repeat this. And then there may be some feedback, right? So you might be asked some additional questions, which might require you to go back to this process and start designing new experiments to test hypotheses. So you can go back and forth at any of these levels right here. So let's look at a case study for an example to take us through the process of scientific method. So we're going to kind of go back to these mice. Now remember the mice, right? So we have a beach population and an inland population. As you can see, they have different coat colors, right? So inland is darker, which kind of matches this environment, and the beach mouse is a lot lighter, which matches the sand or its environment. All right, so let's look at this example of the study of these two mice. So we know what the observation is, that there are two types of mice, or really two colorations of the same species, and they match, each of the colorations match their individual habitats. The question is, why does the same species of mouse match their habitat? So why we have two different colored mice of the same species that match their habitat? The hypothesis is the color patterns had evolved as adaptations to protect the mice from predators. So this kind of goes back to natural selection. So here we have a change in coat color, and where they're going to more likely survive is where they're going to inhabit. Now you want to make a prediction. The prediction is, if mice were designed that did not match their habitat, were placed outside, then they would be preyed upon more heavily than mice that did match their surroundings. So you want to test this prediction. The experiment was that they built models of mice, they painted them to match one of the surroundings, so the beach or the inland, and then they placed equal numbers of each type of model of mouse in each habitat. And then the data was they recorded signs of predation. So signs of predation might be scratch marks or bite marks or pieces missing. Now, these are the results, right? So the results are often shown in a graph type format, right? So it's easily visualized. So here we have the beach habitat, and this shows a graph, right? So we have the percentage that were attacked. So in the beach habitat, you would expect the darker models to be attacked more because they're more conspicuous. And that was, in fact, the case. Almost 75% of the dark models had signs of predation, and only just over 25% of the light models. Look at the inland habitat. The light models would expect to have more signs of predation over the dark models, and that's exactly the case, right? So it's over 75% of the light models had signs of predation, and just about 25% of the dark model in the inland habitat. So remember the hypothesis, right? So you go back to your hypothesis. The color patterns had evolved as adaptations to protect the mice from predators. What is your conclusion? Is this hypothesis supported by the data? What do you think? Typically, there's some statistical analysis performed, and you should see error bars here. So you don't want the error bars of these matching up to where these are going to average out as well. So let's just say that the error bars do not line up with each other. And you could say that, yes, the hypothesis is supported. It appears that the mice that match their environment are safer from predators than those that do not. All right. So in terms of controlled experiments, so I talked about experiments are typically controlled, and the controls are really meant to allow you to determine whether you can rely on your experimental process or not. So typically there's two groups. There's an experimental group and a control group. Here, the experimental group would be the non-camouflaged mice, right? So those are the ones that you're looking for signs of predation. So you're looking for data on those. The control group are the camouflage mice. So you would expect less. So that would be under the normal conditions, right? So they weren't really treated. Variables are features or quantities that can vary in an experiment. right? So things can vary in an experiment. You want as little variables as possible, but there's always an independent, at least one independent variable and one dependent variable. The independent variable is the one that's manipulated by the researchers. So it's basically how the experiment is set up, right? So here you're looking for signs of predation. You can kind of look at your data and say, is it like the number of mice that had signs of predation, right? So that would be the independent variable, right? So which group of mice showed that? And then the dependent variable is the one that's predicted to be affected in the response. So there, you look at your data, right? And then you want to look at the group that you would expect to see the most signs of predation. And of course, that would be those that were non-camouflage. So that could be the light mice in the inland environment or the dark mice in the beach environment. All right, so some other thoughts about science real quick. So in terms of science, there's a difference between a hypothesis and a theory, right? So remember, a hypothesis is a lot more narrow in scope. So you make one hypothesis to test one thing. A theory, in general, can lead to multiple hypotheses, and it's more broader in scope than a hypothesis. Theories are typically supported by large bodies of evidence in comparison to a hypothesis, right? So many different areas of science might support a particular theory. One example would be natural selection. Now, in terms of science, there is some benefits to cooperation between scientists. And that's a cooperative approach. And of course, benefits to diverse viewpoints. Both of those, science is kind of dependent on these, right? If only one group worked on a particular problem, it would take a lot longer for them to determine what the answer to that problem, or find some data, than it would if the multiple scientists were kind of working together. And then diverse viewpoints allows people to think kind of let's say one group might be aiming towards a particular hypothesis. Then, that's kind of your baby, right? So you like that hypothesis. You want it to be true. But then what if it's not true? It's good to have other viewpoints to put some input into it so that everyone has some ideas and can contribute to the scientific community. So it's good to have good communication skills. Now, I already mentioned this before, scientists generally kind of check each other, right? So if let's say you publish on something, you come up with some conclusions, other scientists should be able to come up with the same conclusions. And of course, repeat your experiments. It is not unusual for different scientists to work on the same research question, right? So going back to the cooperative approach and diverse viewpoints. Right. So multiple scientists are often working on the same question. Now, a little bit more on the value of diversity in terms of science, or really anything for that matter. Right. So it's important to have those different views coming from different groups, because everyone has their own experiences and they might have different knowledge base. So everyone contributing to the conversation will improve upon everyone's knowledge overall. Okay, so it's important that everyone's voice is heard. So a couple final thoughts, right? So in terms of the science, it's the goal of science is to understand natural phenomena. Science is marked by discoveries, and science and technology kind of go hand in hand, except technology is marked by inventions. So we have discoveries and inventions. Okay, so discoveries is related to science, inventions related to technology. Now, science depends on technology, and technology is evolved due to science, right? The demand in the science field. So it's important that science and technology kind of evolve or progress together. Otherwise, we will, be at a standstill, right? So we wouldn't be able to find out more information. So here's an example. We have in terms of just diversity and everyone's viewpoint, right? So we have the printing press. It relied on innovations from China, the paper and ink, and then of course combining, innovations from Europe, mass production, putting them together really improved upon our ability to transmit information all over the world. So a little bit, it's just a couple thoughts, something to have you think about. Normally, we would have a discussion in class about this, but just give it some thought. We might have a online discussion at some point. In terms of the combination of science and technology, it has since they've evolved together, has had such a profound effect on society. For example, one example would be the discovery of DNA. First of all, DNA was discovered, and then now we have better technology to be able to detect changes in that DNA very quickly. Now, there has been some debates on technology, and they center more on should we do it than can we do it? Because we can do a lot, but should we do it? Is it ethical to do that? There's a lot of controversial topics in science. Can you think about some of them? Also, why don't you think about this in terms of science and or technology? How has it impacted your life? And so that was our discussion on scientific method with a couple examples and some thoughts for you to ponder. Now, chapter 2 is next.